Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new stream. Of course, it would be a new stream and I'm muted straight away. But welcome. Today is the start of Startup Storytime, and this is a show dedicated to helping you understand what founders and CEOs, CTOs, and developers at startups at Microsoft Founders Hub, or who have come through the Microsoft Founders Hub into Microsoft and what we do, and help to inspire you with everything that they have done. Today, I'm joined with Nick Smith, who is the CEO of Cloudmaker. But before we go any further, I would just like to run through the code of conduct. As with every stream that we have, we just be pleasant, be aware of others. It's a learning environment. We're all here to just learn. So take it easy, ask some good questions, and have some fun. So with that, I'm going to bring up Nick onto the stream, who is going to talk to us a little bit about what he does. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Liam. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's great to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yep. So I'm Nick Smith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cloudmaker. We're a cloud automation company, and really our mission is to enable businesses globally to access the transformational power of cloud technology. So really, that's what we're setting out to do with the Cloudmaker product. My background is been in the IT industry for over 15 years. Left my degree course because I was frustrated and I wanted to get into the world of work, and ended up co-founding an MSP business. So, installing servers in data centers, and that was really my first foray into building a business.
Amazing. So you haven't really worked in a big corporate, is that right? You just come straight into startups and sort of building small companies, is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I don't have a big corporate enterprise background. Literally straight out of university. I worked in a bike shop. That was really my first job post university. I needed money to pay rent whilst I was building out the first business. And in the nights, I was working hard to actually get the company off the ground with a couple of other guys. And eventually we got to a point where I could leave the bike shop and actually run the MSP business, and it could pay my rent for me rather than having to work multiple jobs. So yeah, I've always been in the trenches in the startup world. Never been in big corporates, but yeah, I've earned a lot of scars in how to build a business.
Brilliant. That is what we like to hear. I think whenever you speak to startup founders, or especially when I speak to startup founders, I always find that there's always a really cool story of somebody having to overlap with one job to even build and get off the ground with another one. And there's always like that transition period. I find that. How did you find that? That must have been quite difficult to do, right?
Yeah, it was very stressful. So, I found myself at university. I was doing computing and business, and really I was just frustrated. I was speaking to my friends at university and asking them, what are you going to do with your lives? And actually I realized that no one had an idea of what they wanted to do. We were all at university really because that was really the norm. Everyone leaves school, goes to university, gets a degree. And I found myself very frustrated in that world. So I took the decision to leave university and really set about figuring out how I go and build this technology business. So on my degree course, I was learning things about obviously how to run a business, but also all about the new technologies that were emerging, and cloud was just emerging at that point. And I could really see how transformational it could be to the world of businesses globally, really. So yeah, it was very stressful making that decision to leave. Obviously, had to go and find a job to feed myself and pay rent, and then obviously try and figure out how to start a company. I'd never done that before. So, there were a lot of learnings around, how do you actually set about starting a company?
That's going to be one of the questions I actually want to ask you, is how you went about that. But before we go about that, let's have a little chat about Cloudmaker. Let's talk a little bit. What is Cloudmaker? Where did the idea come from? So you worked in a bike shop, you wanted to get this going, you have a technology kind of background in that sense. How did you then put two and two together and think, let's start up Cloudmaker? Or how did you come about to this position where you're at today?
Yep. So through luck, good fortune, and lots of hard work, that IT service provider, that MSP business grew and became very successful. We grew to around 40 employees, delivering very, very complex cloud solutions. So that business actually evolved over time as the cloud industry evolved, and we ended up adopting Microsoft Azure technology. So we had to migrate all of our customers from our data centers to Azure, and then we were delivering pure Azure solutions to very large enterprises actually at that time. And And one of the pain points I was actually experiencing trying to grow that business was the technologies to adopt cloud are very, very complex. So things like DevOps and infrastructure as code, trying to find engineers, for my MSP business was very, very challenging. And actually, when I stopped and analyzed the problem, I realized that there was a way to solve that problem. So really, Cloudmaker came out of experiencing a kind of real world pain point running that MSP business. So, how it came about was, infrastructure as code and DevOps was really the primary way of building complex Azure solutions. But what I realized as part of the workflow of building these solutions is every engineer starts by drawing a diagram. We all go to the whiteboard, we all draw out what we want to build. We then may go to something like Visio and create the diagram in Visio. The big problem comes then when you take that diagram, you go, right, I need to build this. And you have to go and find that engineer with all the requisite skills to actually convert it to infrastructure as code. That's the problem. So that was the aha moment for me, was, well, why don't we build a system that lets you diagram cloud infrastructure? Let's incorporate things like machine learning and different governance engines to help engineers get to valid outcomes, and then let the machine do all the heavy lifting of actually writing the code for you. So, showed it to a few friends at Microsoft. They loved the idea. And it was really at that point I decided, right, I need to go and pursue this. This is a much bigger problem to solve than the MSP business that I was in. So managed to negotiate my exit out of the MSP business and co-founded Cloudmaker at that point.
Amazing. It's always great to hear when sort of something like this is the amalgamation of lots of other things and real world problems. And I was going to ask you if it was napkin math, and by the sounds of it, it is. And that's brilliant. I love it when they come about as well. So you've had this transition, you've gone through this journey. What would you say is some of the biggest personal challenges that you've faced? Because starting a company isn't by no means a small feat, right? You have mountains and mountains to climb. Surely when you get to the top of one, you then have to climb another. So what would you say is a personal, ignoring the professional and the business side of it? What have you had to sacrifice?
Yeah, so I think the first kind of crisis I had in my personal life was really that decision to leave university. So that was a big decision. My parents actually supported me in that decision, but they turned around to me and said, well, you're not moving home, you're gonna have to go and get a job and support yourself. So that was very, very challenging. And really at that point I didn't know what I was letting myself in for in terms of becoming a founder and growing a startup. But then personal challenges are really, I would say, relationships, maintaining relationships. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into building a business. You can have a great idea, but what you don't realize going into it is there's all the ancillary things that you have to do to keep the business alive, from bookkeeping, the finances, the admin side, all the way to actually getting your service or product off the ground, evolving it. And that's just long hours and hard work. It's 7 days a week. You don't get home until very late in the evening. So you end up sacrificing a lot of your relationships. And I've been lucky enough that my friends and my family have understood what I'm trying to build. So they've been there for me, even though I haven't always been there for them when I'm in the trenches building the business. So that I'd say is probably the biggest personal challenge as a founder, is you're managing these relationships and oftentimes having to sacrifice some of them.
Wow. I mean, you talk about sacrifice. People always talk about sacrifices, but no one really ever goes into what it actually means. And people always sort of skim over that. So thank you for giving us an insight into it. I mean, let's talk a little bit about now the professional challenges. So you mentioned, you get home late, you have to do accounting and bookkeeping. You have all these you have to wear many hats, right? So that's kind of what it sounds like. How did you balance that as a founder? Did you have to bring somebody else in? Is it just you that was doing this? What were some of the challenges that you faced from a professional standpoint then?
Yeah, so obviously when you get started, you've got no money in the bank, no customers, and you need to set about solving that problem. So sales becomes the primary focus. I'm technical really in terms of my background. So at university, I was also doing web development in my spare time, building websites for friends and family. I wasn't a sales guy. I had no idea really how to go about selling. So really what you have to do is pick up all these skills as you're building the aeroplane and as it's running down the runway and you're trying to get it off the ground. So that the professional challenges are these many hats that you wear, being able to dedicate time to the areas of the business that you really need to dedicate time to, and being able to prioritize as well. Sometimes you have to let some fires burn so that you can go and execute on, go and put this fire out over here, essentially. So that was a big learning curve. In the MSP business, that was a big learning curve. And then obviously I was stupid enough to start a new company. And this time around, it's a software company. And naively, I thought, a lot of the skills I'd learned in the first business would be transferable to the new business. But actually, running a software business is completely different from running a service provider people business. So now I'm having to learn about software engineering and the processes around software engineering. How do you build like an elite software engineering team? They are all of the professional challenges I'm sure people listening in and running their own startups have been through and are going through. But really, it's just having the focus and the prioritization to pick up these skills and become very good at doing them, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. So you're on like the receiving end of the stick when a developer says, "Hey, it's going to take me 3 days to complete this," and suddenly it takes 3 weeks. So I feel the pain that you're going through there. That's
yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. And picking up things like Scrum and Agile from the software development side, and you're exactly right. When you're not a software developer, how do you hire software developers? That was a big challenge that I faced, and we went through some iterations of hiring where we managed to bring some people in, and then they bring more skills into the business, and then you can go and hire more and more people, and obviously expand the skills base that you have within the business. But all of those are like super big challenges that you need to solve.
So how did you face that then? So if we look at hiring people, you put out a LinkedIn post or maybe flyers. How did you go about hiring people and then having the interview? Because if you don't understand a software engineer or how the role is supposed to be, how do you hire for that role? How did you sit down with them and talk to them without them sort of glassing over you?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I was fortunate enough to meet an incredible engineer who is my co-founder, actually, Alex Metaxas. When we started Cloudmaker, we were still part of the MSP business, so we actually spun out of that business. And I was facing this challenge, and I think it was my brother mentioned that this guy lived over the road from him, and he's a great developer, and I should go and speak to him. And it was just fate, really. It was just luck and fate. Managed to meet with Alex, went for a beer, really talked through this problem. And that was the kind of first hire into Cloudmaker, and obviously becoming my co-founder in the business that then enabled us to go and build the wider team.
Nice. So like all the ducks aligned essentially for that to happen. That's brilliant.
There's a lot of luck involved in this stuff, really. So a lot of luck.
I'm hearing this from a lot of founders that you've got to have sort of some kind of wits, and then you sort of go down your golden path, but then all the bits that have to sort of feed and build that path all come from arbitrary sort of connections and knowing someone who knows somebody or being in the right place at the right time. And it all kind of seems like it's very similar for your journey as well.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
Exactly right, Liam. Yeah. And what I'd also say is that, luck is a big part of it, but if you keep working hard, obviously you keep going at it long enough, then you can be lucky enough as well. You can find that luck, if you keep going.
Your hard work will pay off.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got a couple of people in the chat. So hello, Anish. So we're actually joining from Bangalore. Wonderful. So you're from India, and then we have somebody from Indiana as well. Hello. So we've actually got a global stream today, which is awesome. So it's great to see you. If you have any questions for Nick, pop them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end. Now, we're 15 minutes in, and I know you have a bit of a demo, but I just want to ask you, before we get into the demo, what kind of Azure technologies are you using, and how did you find Founders Hub? Now, I can kind of understand from the gist of your business why you'd be using Microsoft Founders Hub, but can this be cloud agnostic? Can you sort of look at why are you using it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, firstly, we had to pick a cloud to build against. To start with, Cloudmaker is a cloud automation system. It enables you to design cloud infrastructure, cloud solutions. It can be multi-cloud, but when we started, obviously, we felt that we had to pick one. The problem space would be too large if we were picking all the major cloud vendors. So obviously my background, a Microsoft service provider, MSP, knew Microsoft very well, had lots of connections, knew how the machine worked. And the other side of it as well is we had to make a bet in terms of which cloud provider was going to really dominate in the enterprise space, which obviously is the kind of customers that we're looking at, is the enterprise space. And for me, it was always Microsoft. So Microsoft have obviously got a great background in delivering enterprise IT. And then when they came about with their cloud services, I could see from a licensing perspective for enterprises, it was a pretty seamless transition to be able to move those licenses to Azure. So for me, I could see, from the business perspective, that enterprises would be adopting Azure quite aggressively over the coming years, and therefore I felt the cloud that we needed to pick was Microsoft Azure. And then the technologies that we're using are things like app services on Azure, Azure Functions, Azure SQL, and now we're starting to adopt things like Azure Containers, for instance, and some of the newer and more complex technologies that are available on the Azure side. But what I would say about Azure is it has enabled us to start small and then scale the infrastructure that underpins Cloudmaker as we grow. This isn't something that I would have been able to do in the old data center world. It's too rigid. We can quickly deploy. We can introduce modern ways of working, continuous development, continuous deployment to the Azure services. So really, Azure is a massive force multiplier for us in terms of how we deliver the application. And then in terms of how I got involved in Microsoft for Startups, really that was a contact at Microsoft. They said, look, you need to go and apply for Microsoft for Startups. You're already doing stuff in Azure. You're really focused on Microsoft. This is a perfect fit. And then obviously, went and applied, managed to speak to some people at startups and realized, there's a lot of advantages to being in the startups program. Not just the credits, obviously they help in terms of helping pay for our Azure infrastructure in the early days, but also in terms of support around, how should we be building our business, the connections that they can provide in terms of, if you need funding, they can connect you with VCs and people that can help with funding. So it was really transformational. Actually joining the startups program really gave us that kind of acceleration that we needed in those early days.
You said the magic word there. I was about to say, it kind of sounds like an accelerator in some form, which is brilliant.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's really cool, and it's really insightful to see or hear that you're using functions and app services, given they're serverless services. So for those of you who are watching, who are software devs or cloud infrastructure or cloud architects, serverless functions really help you, or serverless services rather, actually help you with cost optimization. So is that something that you found using these services, that it's more costing less and you're doing a lot more with it? Because a lot of people would generally say, I'm going to spin up some containers, I'll spin up a virtual machine and it will stay dormant. So I guess for your architecture, it's obviously correct to use event-driven given what you do, but do you find you're reaping the benefits of serverless services in that instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are. And I think there is a debate. I've seen some threads on LinkedIn, about people moving out of the cloud back to the data center. And there's always going to be this tension between, something that is run by someone else that's easy to consume and may on the face of it feel more expensive versus I can have a server under my desk and it costs me a few $100s to install that. But really the difference is with these PaaS services is that you can spin them up as you need them and you can spin them down when they're no longer being utilized. In our quieter times for Cloudmaker, which is actually becoming less and less for us now. But in the early days, we were mainly focused on Europe. So, out of hours, we could scale down, and then in hours, we could scale up very easily. And obviously that allowed us to manage the cost side of things as well. Really the flexibility of, something like Azure gives you that power to elastically scale and then contract your infrastructure back down and obviously manage the cost of that infrastructure at the same time.
Oh, that's really interesting to know. I'm kind of glad you touched on capital expenditure kind of very ever so slightly there in terms of the long haul for building servers or buying servers that sit under desks versus cloud migrations and whatnot. That is another whole kettle of fish we're not going to go into. I do want to give you time to do your demo. So if you want to take it away, I want to see what Cloudmaker has to offer and what you can do with it. So if you want to show us in the audience, if you start sharing your screen,
I will. Then
let's take a look.
Button.
That's all good. It's at the bottom in the middle.
I see it. Yeah, here we go. So let me find I want to share this window and this one here. Okay, cool. So that should hopefully be sharing.
Wonderful. So we'll pop that one onto the screen. So we can now see your screen.
Yeah, cool. So what you see here is Cloudmaker. So like I said, what Cloudmaker is setting out to do is solve this problem that exists today around how do we design, configure, deploy, and manage complex cloud infrastructure. The tools available to us today are really things like infrastructure as code, DevOps, for instance, and very complex technologies that require engineers using those technologies to have a combination of software engineering expertise, but also cloud expertise. So those sort of resources in the industry today are in limited supply, and this is proving a bottleneck for enterprises to digitally transform. So Cloudmaker is set about solving that by keeping everyone in a paradigm that they're very familiar with, which is diagrams. So you see I'm in Cloudmaker, I'm in my workspace here. I have some blueprints and some pipelines. I'm going to jump into my pipelines area. And you can see in my blueprints area, and in blueprints, what you can see here is I've actually got some Azure infrastructure designs already pre-baked. So if I was the enterprise engineering team, I'd be modeling the various pieces of my Azure infrastructure here in the different diagrams. And if I just jump into this classic hub and spoke design, see, this is essentially a hub and spoke landing zone, essentially for Azure. You can see in the center is a diagram, and we can all start to reason about where all the different services and pieces are and how the traffic is flowing through this infrastructure. If I wanted to add to this infrastructure, I'd simply go and find the resources that I want. So if I wanted to add a storage account here onto my design, I can search for it on the left-hand side, and I can drag that onto the drawing surface. And Cloudmaker has some awesome pieces built into it. So for instance, it has a validation engine. So as I drag this storage account in, you can see that it's already guiding us to the valid location to place this storage account. So storage account must live in a resource group. So all the resource groups are highlighted. I can drop that into the resource group. And if I want to configure that storage account, I fire open the properties panel. And in here, I can enter in the name of my storage account. I can jump through and configure all the different properties for this storage account. And once I'm happy with my design and my configuration, we have a few other pieces as well. So a security scanner. So obviously security risks with cloud infrastructure are massive. I think the average for a security breach is around $3 million in terms of the cost to a business. So what you want to be able to do is eliminate security threats before you deploy your infrastructure to Azure. So our security scanner runs the rule over your cloud infrastructure that you've designed and your configuration. And for instance, my storage account here, it should have HTTPS enabled. The security scanners pick that up. I click the button. It fires open the properties panel, highlights the area that needs to be resolved. I can set HTTPS to true. And now I know that I've configured my storage account to security best practice as according to Microsoft. So once I've finished with my design and my configuration, it's really all about deployment. So firstly, Cloudmaker has a compilation engine under the hood that can compile this diagram and configuration to any infrastructure as code language. So if you're adopting infrastructure as code, but you're finding it hard to write, but you want to continue leveraging those tools, you can export this diagram as any of the main code languages, ARM, Bicep, or Terraform, and you can go drop that into your repo and deploy those code templates. The other way of operating Cloudmaker is actually we have a deployment engine. So if I head to this pipelines area, and I go to a pipeline that I've pre-configured for the demo, and I go to configuration, it's really a simple process of picking your diagram, picking the version, choosing how you want to deploy it. So we integrate with CI/CD systems. You can deploy directly to Azure if you want to, entering all the values that you need for your infrastructure, and then going ahead and deploying this. So if it's a direct deployment, you click the deploy button, off it goes. If it's a CI/CD integrated deployment, you can see I've got Azure DevOps here running, and it's deploying my demo environment. And once the deployment's complete, you can see I've got all of my resource groups that were in my diagram. And if I click into each of these, you can see that it's actually provisioned the infrastructure for me. And at no point have I had to write any infrastructure as code. All I need to do is operate within this world of diagrams. If I wanted to update this infrastructure, if I wanted to manage the life cycle, I'd simply come back into my diagram, I'd update the resources, I'd add more resources, remove any resources, and redeploy, and Cloudmaker would manage the rest for you. And really what you see in this diagram is what you get in Azure. So that's the whistle-stop tour through the product, Liam.
That's amazing, and I absolutely love it. It's really cool to see when you are taking the heavy lifting away from developers and CLIs and going to this kind of low code, no code format when it comes to deploying your infrastructure, albeit you're not deploying or necessarily writing the code, but in terms of thinking and how you're going to structure your architecture and just visually seeing it, it's really cool. Now, there are a number of tools which help you do this kind of stuff, but this is by far probably one of the most comprehensive platforms I've seen actually working and deploying this complete solution for you. So I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think when it comes to looking at this, who is your target audience when you are sort of giving this out or wanting people to use it, right? Who would you go to as a standard user?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liam. And I think, for everyone on the call, the startups that are going through this themselves, figuring out who your ideal customer profile is very, very important. And we had to go through an iterative process to figure out who are we targeting. When we started, we felt that we were targeting smaller business, individual engineers. And actually what we've learned as we've developed through our kind of sales process and figured out how do we sell this product, actually, our ideal customer profile is really vertical agnostic. It's anyone that's using cloud, but it's really in the enterprise space. So it's where there's large complexity. There's organizations that want to move to the cloud or in the cloud and want to optimize. And then the other ideal customer profile for us is actually MSPs as well. So what we're finding is there's this lack of talent in the market that really knows how to do infrastructure as code and DevOps to a very good degree. And this bottleneck is affecting not only enterprises, but they're trying to outsource to MSPs, and MSPs also have this constraint as well. So we're finding that MSPs targeting enterprises and enterprises themselves are really our ideal customer profile for Cloudmaker.
Amazing. So if you're watching this and you're in an enterprise and you want to get hands-on with this kind of stuff, then of course I have popped it into the chat. You can go to Cloudmaker.ai and you'll be able to see a holistic view of everything that Nick and his team are doing with this project. I think it's amazing to see this. It really helps developers and obviously people in DevOps get hands-on and boost your productivity. This is kind of like a cheat code when it comes to deploying to the cloud, right? So I have one follow-up question to this. So how many services does this support? So I think in Azure, we have over 200 services. How many service APIs are you able to hit, and what's available to you, and what's your next step with the project?
Yeah, so one of the problems that we set out to solve at the very beginning was how do we keep pace with the rate of change on something like Azure? The feedback that we had from customers, for instance, leveraging Terraform is, there's lag in the resource providers. I need this new service, but the resource provider isn't there. Obviously, things like AZ API with Terraform is starting to solve some of those problems. But we felt that we really need to solve this if we were going to have a compelling product. So we actually built an automation engine under the hood. It scans the Azure APIs, the schemas, and it ingests those automatically into Cloudmaker. Engineer will actually check that the resource will work and it's deployable and there's no bugs with it. And then we release it into product. So we can move very, very quickly when Microsoft release a new service. So our coverage is very, very good across all the Azure services. And if we don't have a service that you need, we can add it into the product very, very quickly. So if a simple service could be added within 24 hours, for instance, into Cloudmaker. And how we're iterating on this automation process is we're now looking to eliminate that manual step at the end with modern automation and AI, the new large language models, so that we'll be able to actually ingest automatically into Cloudmaker without the manual step at the end. So we'll be able to move even faster. So that's how we keep pace with the rate of change. We have very good coverage in the product.
It's like you can read my mind. I was about to ask you how you can incorporate LLMs into this going forward. But that's amazing to see. So how does somebody go around wanting a service to be added? Is there somewhere that people can add a ticket, or how do they contact you? What's the best form for someone to say, hey, I want this service? Nick, can you go and add it for me?
Yep. So support@cloudmaker.ai, or we have in-app chat as well. And we have the team there on standby to assist users that come into the app. And if they're trying to configure something and the resource isn't there, or we have an older API spec for that resource, they raise their hand, have a chat with us, and we have a team dedicated to getting that into the product as quickly as possible. So we are on a daily basis working with customers to add things that they need into the product. And I guess the advantage of being a startup and very agile is we can move very, very, very quickly.
Yeah, of course. So brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, before we get going, because we have hit the 30-minute mark and we've got one more thing to go through after this. What is one piece of advice that you would give to any budding startup founder or anybody who wants to start their new startup, or as a student, somebody pre-building? What's one bit of advice you'd give to them?
Gosh, that's a good question. Let me take a second. I know we're over
I
time.
made you think about that one.
No pressure. So yeah, I guess the bit of advice would be, to if you have an idea or a product that you think is good, is actually go and test the market. Some of the mistakes that I've made in the early days of Cloudmaker and my MSP business was thinking that I had the really good idea and everyone's going to want to buy it, and then spending lots of time building something and realizing that they don't. And actually, the biggest skill that I've learned is being able to speak to your customer base, who you think is going to want this product, and determine, are they actually going to want this product, before you go and spend years of your life trying to build it and then finding out that no one wants it. So doing demand validation is a very important thing, and I'd say a key skill. You're building prototypes, building mock-ups, and then being able to get out there and actually speak to your target customer. I would say that is a very core skill to learn as a founder, because then it allows you to go and build the right thing and invest all your effort and energy and time into building something that is going to be successful.
Brilliant. That's a really good bit of advice. I like that. And it kind of emulates or sort of adds on to the theory of failing fast, right? So going out, sort of testing a theory, if it doesn't work, straight away that it doesn't work. And that kind of emulates that kind of saying. So with that, I'm actually going to say a massive thank you, Nick, because that was absolutely brilliant chatting to you. Of course, if you are on the stream or on the recording, then please go to aka.ms/MSFT startups, so Microsoft startups, or scan this QR code, and it will take you to Microsoft Founders Hub, and it will help explain everything that we have been through today, the journey that Nick has been on, and how he got into Microsoft Founders Hub, and all the support that we enable you here at Microsoft. And go check it out. Go have a play. And if you have any questions, you can either hit us up on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I've posted Nick's LinkedIn URL in the chat. So if you want to connect with him on LinkedIn, then go grab him. Otherwise, you can contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. My handle is the same. It's just hidden. It's there somewhere on my screen. If I hide that one, there we go. If you want us, then you can grab us there. Alternatively, come back in 2 weeks' time. So every other Wednesday, we're going to be running this for the next startup story time. So with that, a massive thank you to everybody that has joined today, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Liam.